Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest.
Fred Armisen.
Fritz Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Talkhouse Podcast. I'm Josh Modell. On this week's episode, we've got a couple of guys who found huge followings on the internet and elsewhere in different ways, but with similar outlooks. Met and Julian Shapiro-Barnum. Met is one-third of the brother band AJR, who found massive pop hits over the past decade with cheeky but sometimes deceptively deep songs like Bang and World's Smallest Violin. Perhaps those more into the indie-adjacent world have heard their collaborations with Weezer. But for purposes of this conversation, Met is wearing one of his many other hats, which include Columbia professor, nonprofit founder, and as of this week, published author. He just released his first book, Amplify: How to Use the Power of Connection to Engage, Take Action, and Build a Better World. As you may have guessed from the title, it's about action and advocacy, including in the area of climate crisis, for which Met is an ardent activist. He casually mentions hanging out with Al Gore here, which may be a Talkhouse first. The book aims to provide strategies for folks who want to do their part, which is a noble cause if you ask me. It features pop culture names like Ben Folds and Jim Gaffigan, in addition to folks more known in the activism world. And, like I said, it's out now. The other half of today's conversation is Met's pal, comedian and internet personality Julian Shapiro-Barnum. An inquisitive guy by nature, Shapiro-Barnum recorded a series of internet videos over the years that were largely conversations with regular people. And during the pandemic, he hit on the idea of chatting with children about how they managed to stay positive when everything seems so crazy. That idea became the very popular series Recess Therapy, which is as charming as it sounds, and it should be noted, launched the Corn Kid into internet fame. These two jump right into a lively conversation about how music and advocacy can go hand in hand, about Julian's various shows, including Recess Therapy and Celebrity Substitute, and lots more. Enjoy.
Hello, friend.
Hello. First question. How'd you get so handsome? No, I'm joking. How are you?
Good job.
How's your day going?
Everything's going so well. How about you?
Fantastic. What am I doing today? I lent my friend some puppets. I just got those back, so I feel whole again.
Wait, hold on. We have to start there. What kind of puppets did you lend your friend, and for what purpose?
I'm not very public about this element of my identity, but I'll be brave here. I was a puppeteer as a child and made by hand a ton of kind of like Muppet style puppets. And I still do some puppetry with my puppets time to time. And my friend wanted to borrow them for a short film. And every second that they're out of my apartment was terrifying for me because they have so much sentimental value.
You probably know this, but in Union Square, there's the winter markets, where there are all of the different stalls. And there's a puppet person who shows up every winter. And when I was a kid, we actually bought a whole bunch of puppets from that puppeteer. And my brothers and I...
I've seen that guy before. Yeah. He's always there, right?
Always there. We made up entire backstories for these puppets that we bought. And we actually bought multi-generational puppets. So we got kids, and then we got the adults, and then we got the grandparents, and we named all of them. And all of them had kind of full backstories. And we would put on shows for our parents and our grandparents. So we were not professionals like you, Julian. We were not making our own puppets.
Sorry, I was really very, very prolific is what I'm trying to get across. I recently was looking for something on a hard drive and found a ton of stuff that I made as a child. Were you always making from a young age?
Yes. We were making some incredibly ridiculous things. And it's funny when our mother would kind of tell other people what we were doing as kind of a way of showing off that was really embarrassing for us. She would always say that we were having our Lord of the Rings figures putting on a production of Hairspray. And it's not untrue. We actually did that. Yeah. But my day has been good so far. I've had 2 walks in Central Park so far.
Wow.
2 interviews that I was doing. And during the first one, I had a severe allergic reaction because there's so much pollen going on right now. So I started crying during one of the interviews, not on purpose.
Were you outside during the interview?
Yeah.
Speaking of interviews, what are you doing the interviews about? What are you promoting right now?
Oh, wow. Look at you. Have you done this before?
Yeah, it's, whatever.
I guess I wrote a book. I wrote my first book, and it's called Amplify. And I'm doing a lot of interviews promoting that. And I mean, for the people who are listening, you can probably tell from the beginning of our conversation, but I'm a musician, but I also...
Should we introduce ourselves?
Yeah, I guess we did do that.
All right. Hey, listeners. Welcome. My name is Julian Shapiro-Barnum. I am a comedian and writer, and what people mostly know me for is I interview children, and I do that through a couple of mediums. I have a show called Recess Therapy. I have a show called Celebrity Substitute, and I have a show called Gems. And that's a little bit how Adam and I met, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. Adam, who are you?
Oh, you're so far ahead of ourselves right now. I'm Adam. I'm a musician. I'm the A in a band called AJR. And that really is my night job. My day job is I work in climate policy. I teach at Columbia. And I run an organization called Planet Reimagine that comes up with creative and outside of the box ways to fight the climate crisis. But wait, Julian, let's talk about children for a moment. How did you get into interviewing children?
Oh, man. Well, I've always been worked with kids, even when I kind of was a kid. I did a lot of camp counseling. I did a lot of I taught kids improv when I was in high school, and the kids would be 2 years younger than me. So I've always felt an affinity for kids, but then I got older. And then my senior year of college, I was doing a ton of on the street, interview type deals. And one day, truly it was interview kids was on a long list of ideas I had. And one spring day, April 21, I was in the playground by my college, Boston University, and I was with some friends, and I was like, let's do this right now. These kids seem like they're having such a fantastic, amazing day. They're having so much fun, and we're all miserable and sad. Maybe we can ask them how they find happiness and learn a thing or two. And I did 4 or 5 kind of short interviews, and it was instantly magic. And we, I edited it, posted online, and it was instantly resonated with people. People really found what the kids had to say very profound. It spoke to them. I felt equally excited, and I made a list of 65 things I wanted to interview kids about. And then 65 things later, I had a show that people really cared about and had really fallen in love with the art of interviewing kids. And now 300, 400 topics later, it's become my thing.
So first of all, that's amazing. And second of all, when you think about kids, if somebody's interviewing a kid, you would think that the kid would change so much about them in order to kind of fit in with the interview. And you would think the adult would also change so much about themselves in order to appeal to the kid. But for those who are listening who have not watched any of Julian's videos, it is such a series of honest conversations where everybody is unapologetically themselves when they come to the table.
Thank you, Adam.
How do you do that?
So I'm a comedy improviser as well. That's my night job. And I feel so much of comedy improv is making your scene partner look good and setting them up for success. And I feel I go into every interview kind of it's an improv scene. And I really just want to be interested in and support whatever the kids want to talk about. And so more often than not, I feel the topic I go in with is not 100% where we start, but we weasel and meander our way back towards the topic. But yeah, it's been very interesting, the things that kids say about all these intense adult things that we're dealing with. The third episode of the show I ever did was actually about climate change and the climate crisis, because that was something I really early on wanted to hear kids' opinions on.
What did they say?
What I always say about kids and climate change is that their ideas on how to make things better are kind of simple. It's very recycle and, take short showers, but their personal connection to the planet and their belief in the ability for the individual to actually make change and move the needle, to me, is very inspiring. And I think if more people thought about taking better care of the planet with the passion and personal connection that kids did, we would be in a much, much better place. Have you spoken to kids about this stuff before?
So I think probably the most recent time that I spoke to a child about this was on your podcast, Gems, with Miles. And most of the time when I talk to kids, you're right. They come up with these either such simple solutions that adults are like, oh, that is never going to move the needle. But they're so passionate about the way that they talk about it that it makes you kind of reconsider almost. And it's funny, I guess a couple of days ago now, I gave the commencement speech at the graduation for Columbia's climate school.
Wow.
And I was talking about the fact that every single student who was sitting in that audience, they have every solution that's needed to solve climate change. The world has every solution that's needed to solve climate change. And so I framed it as like, we know all the what's, but what we're missing is the hows. So if we had one more piece of data or one more invention to bring to a policymaker or any corporation, that's not going to be the thing that's going to move the needle. We have enough of the what's. What we need is more of the hows. And so that, I think, well, hopefully really resonated with the students that they were trying not to go into jobs that were developing more what's, and they were focusing on the hows. And I think kids really think about the what side of things, but in an outside of the box way. So they'll try and come up with a solution that is so obvious and so simple, but that's on the what side. And I think as we get older, it's kind of sad. We go from what the thing is to how do we make it real in the world. And as much as that is the how is exactly what we need to do right now, I think that if we had a more childlike approach to the what's, maybe we could come up with more what's that would be useful.
Kids are very action oriented. They're very hands-on. They're very emotional. And I'm always inspired by how quick they are to try to do something themselves. And I think that's always really inspired me. People are always like, what's the most amazing thing a kid said to you? But it's always more the way they go about what they do than the words themselves. Can I ask you a basic question?
Okay.
I feel like I'm very familiar with where you're at now, but I don't really know a lot about your journey to how you got there. Can you tell me about being a rock star and a climate warrior at this? How did that happen?
Wow. You picked one of my least favorite words in the world. No, I'm kidding.
Rock star?
It's so funny. I always shy away from that word because I really don't think of myself in that way. And I love performing. I love being on stage, but I'm just Adam. I live in this apartment. I have a lot of books. Like I sit around and I walk through the park. Like a rock star for me has such a weird connotation.
Tighter pants.
Tighter. Yeah. Well, I'm wearing kind of like medium tight pants today. So, rock star and climate warrior. So
those are two pretty awful. I kind of hate both of those. But let me say better. How did you navigate being a talented and successful musician and a learned and teached person in the ways of the world?
Wow. This version is making me blush a lot more than the last one. I could not do these things. It was almost inevitable for me. But I'll tell you kind of two very short stories. I grew up in New York City, and I went to a public high school in New York City, and we actually had a human rights class when I was a senior in high school, which is a very rare thing for a public high school to have. We went on a class trip, and I saw someone speak. Her name was Mary Robinson, and she was the president of Ireland and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And when I was a young, impressionable 17-year-old, seeing Mary speak about the connection between human rights and climate change was the first time that connection had ever been made in my mind. And I've been thinking a lot about recently what it takes for one person to change the course of another person's life. And she 100% changed the course of my life. Me hearing her speak made me say out loud, like to my teacher, to other people in the class, I want to do that. I want to study that. And so when I went to college and then continued in school for way too long, I ended up studying the thing that she talked about when I was
Wow.
17 years old.
Can I ask what she talked about?
Yeah. So she was the first person who made the connection between how protecting humans is actually the same thing as protecting the planet. In my mind, it was, oh, nature, trees, water are over here, and then protecting our institutions and our society and protecting people are over here. But if we combine the two things, if we ensure that protection of humans and protection of the planet are interlinked, then we'll be able to do both at the same time. So for me, that was kind of the core. I ended up doing my PhD in that subject, which is about how do we build new renewable energy projects around the world while giving local and indigenous communities ownership over these projects so they're not removed from their land, so their cultural rights aren't disturbed, to make sure we can make this green transition happen. But she was kind of the innovator in this. And then I ended up becoming friendly with her, and I spoke to her after I finished my PhD, and I cited her, I think maybe 30 or 40 times.
Well, I'll let you get to the next story in 1 second, but what was your PhD? What was your thesis?
It's a very nerdy title. It's called Stakeholder Approaches to Human Rights and Development in the Commercial Context. And
I love it. Send me a copy.
You definitely don't want a copy. I'll send you the one paragraph version.
My mom is a professor, and she turned hers into a book, and I don't really understand what it's about, but it's called The Workplace Constitution from the New Deal to the New Right. And then it goes on, but I thought I remembered all of it, but I know the beginning.
So the 5-second version is imagine that you're building a new wind farm. And this wind farm is traditionally in a place where indigenous or local communities live. How do we ensure that these indigenous and local communities benefit from the building of this wind farm? Yes. Whether it's the revenue is going to build new schools and hospitals, whether it's going to provide new jobs, essentially creating a full ecosystem so we can build renewable energy and also support local community.
That's amazing. It sounds really like the opposite of the way people go about building things.
Oh, the number of people that get kicked off of their land for these projects is
insane.
Yeah, it's insane.
What was your second story about?
Yeah. So when we were on tour a bunch of years ago, maybe I want to say 2018, 2019, I was kind of moving into the climate work where I was doing it more publicly, kind of speaking at rallies and giving lectures and things like that. And we showed up in Omaha, Nebraska. And in Omaha, Nebraska, we were doing a concert, but at the same time, a climate organization asked me to come and speak at a rally. I was like, great. Okay, perfect. So I do the sound check for the show, then I go over to the rally. And the rally is really interesting because if you know anything about Omaha, it's not near any ocean. The rally was all about asking the lawmakers in Omaha to make changes about climate policy because of rising sea level. And I was thinking, okay, how do we take this audience that is here and have them rethink the way that they're asking for change, right? Because rising sea level is not going to be the thing that moves any lawmaker in Omaha, Nebraska. And so I ended up giving a speech. I don't know if we're allowed to curse on this podcast, but I ended up giving a speech where it ended up being called Know Your Shit. And basically, it was all about how to really do the research to understand before when you get to asking people for something to know what they want, what they can, the needles that they can move and the levers that they can push. And so that kind of became my framing for a bunch of the things that I was doing moving forward. Then when I did the show later that night, the way to move people from a stage is not different at all when you're doing it at a protest or in some sort of advocacy situation as compared to when you're doing it on stage at a concert. It is, how can you use emotion effectively? What are the tools that you're going to use? What are the storytelling tools that you're going to use to try and move people? It really, in my mind, clicked during that day in Omaha because I went from one directly to another. And then this book idea kind of came about because I was like, okay, the music industry has a lot of really cool strategies for moving people effectively. What if we could use those strategies in order to build better social movements, in particular climate? And I was thinking storytelling, obviously, simply is a really important tactic. We do that in music. We do that in entertainment. Gamification is a big one. How do we move people into the live space effectively? How do we work with people who disagree with us? How do we plan for the future versus work in the present? Featuring is a big one. This is one of my favorite chapters. Featuring, how your favorite artist kind of features other artists on their songs. What if different social movements, when their audiences overlap, could feature each other to make more cohesive movements? So that moment, even kind of way before the book idea started to come about, that moment for me was, okay, let me take all these strategies that I'm using in music and apply them in advocacy. And let me take all these strategies I'm doing in advocacy and apply them in music.
It's fascinating.
So they're not two separate worlds.
Yeah. Do you know Zoran Mamdani is running for mayor right now?
Yes, of course.
I've been doing a lot of hybrid concert rallies. And I interviewed him at a show the other night. And it was just, it was really effective. It was really speaking to people. And it did feel more emotional than other concerts I've been to and more emotional than other rallies I've been to. And yeah, I just think it's fascinating. And I was there and I was like, Adam would have loved this.
What was it about it, do you think, that really resonated with people?
I think it's very meaningful to people. I was going to say young people, but I think people in general, when movements that they believe in are connected to the media and art that they consume. Like, I felt like a lot of the music and the drag performance and all the things that were happening at this concert felt like they represented so many ideals and hopes for the future that like all the performers and artists there felt. And then having him come on stage felt like kind of a stamp or a cosign from him that all these things that we believe in and love were validated, and that in some way, even if he's not overtly saying, I will do X, Y, and Z, him being there, it felt like it represented that he could, which was very meaningful, I think, to a lot of the people there. But just on top of that, music is just so emotional to people. And a lot of the music that night was, they were picking songs that were about change. And it felt apt. It felt perfect, because then he came out and was able to talk about freezing rent and all these things that all these people wanted. And we were already thinking about it and singing about it. It felt very like like Bob Dylan was doing it a while back. It works clearly.
Yeah. So there's a word for that, or there's a phrase for that I love. And the phrase is collective effervescence.
I love that.
Yeah, it's an amazing phrase. And it was coined by this sociologist named Durkheim. And it was coined in the religious context. But outside of the religious context, this idea of people coming together over something and having this kind of group think, and their brainwaves end up getting on the same page, and then they can use that energy for something else. That really happens most effectively in concerts and at sports events, right? You've seen football or soccer matches where everyone is just so engaged. I was at the Taylor concert in Miami last year, and everybody who didn't know each other, had never met each other before, were literally holding hands and singing and dancing. And there's nothing like that feeling. I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of the role that music can play in order to foster change. And in the 1970s, about 20% of the Billboard Hot 100 chart was protest music. That doesn't really happen anymore in that way. And when I say protest music, the songs as a whole were about kind of protest and standing up and fighting. And they could have been, Bob Dylan wrote kind of specific story songs, or he wrote kind of big overarching, like, let's go kind of songs. But today, protest music is more subtle and is more honest. So if you look at the Billboard Hot 100 chart now, a good chunk of the songs have a lyric or two about something that the artist cares about. Yeah. And there was a moment in time when this changed. So the pivotal song, and I don't know if you know this song, but Mike Posner wrote a song called I Took a Pill in Ibiza.
I know that song.
So it was like, this was a moment in time when songs went from big kind of party anthems of I want to stay up all night, whatever, DJ rocking in the house tonight, that kind of thing, to a specific personal story about something that was really emotion driven that people could connect to and see their own story in. That, I think, was the beginning of a new kind of protest music. And yes, there have been big songs like Fight Song by Rachel Platten and Rise Up by Andrew Day. Those have kind of been big protest songs in the last 10 years or so. But I Took a Pill in Ibiza changed the way that artists had permission to talk about their own stories in popular music. And then everyone from Billie Eilish to even Harry Styles, like these major artists now have this permission to tell these personal stories. And a lot of them are reflections of things that are going on in the world. So protest music looks different today than it did in the 1970s, but that doesn't mean it's not powerful.
I had two really powerful in-person experiences recently. Do you know Theater of War?
No.
So I studied this guy in college. His name is Brian Dowries, and I'm going to shorten a very big career here, but like he's done a lot of really amazing work in terms of like taking Greek tragedies and applying them to things that are happening right now. He does a lot of remixes of classic theater, but then recently he's gotten really into the podcasting space and has been doing these shows where they have big name actors read a piece of journalism as if they're a piece of dramatic text. And
that sounds amazing.
Oh, you have to go.
Okay.
So I went to one, and it was an article about healthcare really failing somebody, and it resulted in them dying. They were unable to get a therapist, and they ended up calling a healthcare provider like 56 times. They were stuck in like a ghost network, and it's just this devastating story. And the way they set it up is like this. You all come in, you're kind of sitting in a semicircle, and Oscar Isaac and two other fantastic actors read this piece, and then, you clap. They sit in the audience with you. And then he basically is like, we're going to have an hour-long conversation now about the things in this article. And over the next 45 minutes, an audience took turns standing up, saying ways that they've been failed. People who work in healthcare were sharing stories of ways they've seen things go wrong, ways that they've been part of a broken system. And people were crying. And it was just this insanely moving experience where a group of complete strangers, by the end, like, everyone was standing and talking and hugging and sharing their own experiences. And the reason I thought of it is just these in-person events where people are, I guess, seeing all the ways in which that they're caring about and believing in and talking about the same things. I feel like have such tremendous potential. And I feel like blending music with activism feels like the biggest way of doing that. I was very moved by that experience. The other one is much sillier, but I went to a comedy show the day after Trump won. And I've never been in a space that was like so sad, but so funny and communal at the same time. And it felt like a really interesting experience to be forced to see a comedy show right after that.
The day after the election, I saw Ragtime, which is the exact opposite of a comedy show.
Yeah, I know.
There's so many themes in the show that were so resonant, and like the cast was so emotional from it, and the whole audience, like people walked out halfway through because they couldn't be in that space in the moment. So it's interesting how art can be reflective of what people are going through and society as a whole. I wonder what it would have been like to go to a comedy show the day after the election.
They came out and they were like, we booked this show over the summer.
Yeah.
Kind of assuming Kamala would win. The whole night, it was a show called Stamptown. It was like an alternate reality, and it was so funny because it wasn't true.
Oh my God.
It really worked, and it was very cathartic, and it was a very unique experience.
Did the audience go along?
Yeah, everyone like went along. We like cheered. We were like, it was like playing make believe as a whole group.
Wow, that is so childlike. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, and so the other in-person experience. So in-person is something that I've been advocating for so long, even since a few months into COVID. One of the first things that when I say we, I mean AJR, did was something called A Night in Your Car with AJR. And we did a drive-in concert about 6 months into COVID where we took over a parking lot in Philadelphia. And we did it for a couple nights, and 1,000 cars came in, parked in the parking lot of the arena, the Wells Fargo Arena there. We set up a stage, and we did a whole show on the stage.
Wow.
There was no audio. The audio was transmitted through people's radios in their cars. So everyone was kind of had their cars open. They were either sitting on the top or standing around their cars, and everyone had their radios turned on, and we were sending the audio of what we were playing to people's cars. It was the weirdest thing ever because we would play a song. The first song we played, we finished, silence. Because this is over an enormous parking lot. And yeah, people are clapping, but it's 1,000 cars. The arena holds like 18,000 people. We couldn't really hear any sort of applause. After the third song, somebody started honking their horn in the car.
Oh, really? That's genius.
And then it started catching on, and more people were honking. And, you know, when you hear somebody honking their horn, it's like danger, something is wrong. But then by the end of it, at the end of the concert, it was all 900 cars. People were honking their horn, and it really felt celebratory and amazing. And it was so great that over that short period of time, something that meant one thing in the real world meant something completely different when everybody who was in person together was doing it for a different purpose. And about, I don't know, 8 months ago or so, not to name drop, but I was having dinner with Al Gore. And Al Gore was saying, we need to do better advocacy in the digital space. We need to do a better job of organizing people in the digital space. And I said, sure, but we need to be using the digital space as a way to move people more into the live space. Because every study, everything that I've read shows that, and everything that I've tested on our tour, on other people's tours, says that if you can get people to take action in person with their friends, with their family, then they're more likely to stay engaged. And in the book, I actually interviewed the guy who created Pokemon Go in the book, because I was so interested about moving people from the digital space to the physical world. And that's what Pokemon Go literally did. He said he created a whole bunch of tests. The increase of families doing things together and spending time outside together as a group increased tremendously during COVID, because Pokemon Go brought them from the digital world to the physical world. This happens in music. This happens in advocacy. And I think we need to lean into it more, especially in advocacy, because that's what's going to get people engaged at a deeper level.
I'm doing a new show that I won't speak too much about right now, but like that hinges on live performance, shot for digital. Just because I feel like we need any excuse we can to not be on our phones right now. The whole reason I got into doing interviewing was because of how like isolated and lonely I felt during the pandemic. And walking around with a camera and a microphone felt like a really easy way to break down that barrier and get people to just chat and talk with you. The first show I ever did was called How Are You Doing Right Now? And we would set up a card table and 2 mics, and anyone who wanted to chat could just sit and talk about how they were doing. And people were dying to do it. People would like form a line around the block just to like sit down and have a conversation.
That's great.
Because we were all so starved for it.
I love that. I have a celebrity substitute question for you.
Please tell me.
So Celebrity Substitute is Julian's show where different celebrities come in and teach their skill, their expertise to elementary school students. And it's incredibly heartwarming, incredibly funny. And some of the people who Julian has gotten for the show have been just amazing. One of the things that I've been curious about is how these kids saw something like the pandemic, because kids who are older than that, so middle school, high school, and college students, the pandemic really interrupted their lives. And you see it in test scores. You see it how they relate to other people. And so there's this kind of middle generation that are younger than us, but older than the kids you're working with in Celebrity Substitute, that kind of missed a whole bunch of things. Does something like the pandemic, does that resonate? Do you see any impact from the pandemic in these kids in Celebrity Substitute?
Some of the kids were like born in 2020. So like some of these 5 and 6 year olds, like they don't even remember it. They've definitely like lived with some of the ramifications of it happening. But I feel like I used to really see it with the kids who are a little bit older now. To answer your question specifically, like I feel happy that I don't really see it with a lot of the young kids. they're just so down to play and engage. And like, it's such a fun show to do because we show up at an elementary school. We're shooting at a real school every time. And they come in at the top of the day. They have no idea what we're doing. And we're like, today we're going to be writing a song with Billie Eilish. And half of them don't know who Billie Eilish is. And then they get the opportunity to just share a million ideas. I felt like when I really started doing the show back in 2021, and for the first like year and a half or so of doing it, I really just saw the kids be really afraid of strangers. Like, I feel like such a core element of being a kid is a fearlessness. And I think Don't Talk to Strangers had to be invented because of how down kids are to talk to strangers. I feel as though I've seen a lot of that evaporate since then. But I think early on, a lot of kids were really afraid to be around other people and children. Even on the playground, there was a lot of pantomiming from afar. But I think that's gone away, which is nice.
Okay, so I have one more question about this that I've been very curious about. So kind of goes back to an earlier thing we were talking about. When adults talk to kids, more often than not, they talk down to them, not in a negative way, but the adults think that the kids are not really understanding. And obviously, the kids understand so much more than adults think, whether it's from auditory cues or visual cues. And in some instances, I see that change happen over the course of a conversation of an adult talking to a child. They'll talk slower and trying to explain things to kids or talk with a higher voice or whatever it is. How do you think that the Celebrity Substitute or any of your other projects have changed the adults that you bring in?
That's a fantastic question. I think kids always rise to the occasion. I think, like, if you talk to a kid like you perceive a kid to want to be talked to, like, they will meet you there. But more often than not, I think giving a kid a complicated subject or talking to them in a more mature way, kids are so aspirational and they are fantastic at trying at least to meet you where you're at, as long as you're also down to be a little silly and meander with it. In the way I've seen it change the adults is I feel like kids are so nonlinear. Like, they create in a very roundabout way. They're very eclectic with their ideas. They'll throw like a million things down on the page at once. And I've seen time and time again, celebrities come in, like, I'll shout people out. They don't care. Like Cynthia Erivo or like Andrew Garfield, Florence Pugh. Like, I've seen these people come in with a really clear idea of how they're going to have a lesson plan. I mean, it must be scary to also show up to an elementary school as this person who has had a whole career and be asked to teach it. But it's been really fantastic watching them drop that and do away with getting to point B and really just enjoy the journey of being messy and creative with the kids. And I really advocate just in general for adults to play in that capacity with kids, because I think there's so much to learn. I think there's so much freedom in stepping out of our usual mindsets.
I love that. Yeah. Well, since we started with what are we doing today, Julian, what is the rest of the day? Oh, that's even better. What are we doing yesterday? Should we just move backwards?
No, let's say, what are you doing for the rest of the day, Adam?
For the rest of the day, I have a bunch of phone calls, and then I'm going to an award show tonight. I'm not winning anything, but I'm just going to
Whose award show is it?
It's the Paley Honors. It's a media award ceremony and going to support other people who are doing amazing things in media. And so I need to figure out what I'm wearing. So that's going to be like the next 15 minutes of me going through my closet, figuring out what does cocktail attire even mean? Like,
I don't know.
So unhelpful. So I don't. It's like, what if I wore it like a tux, but without a tux shirt underneath it? Or is that too fancy?
Just bare chest.
Oh, that's not what I meant, but I totally could do that.
I think a tux to the t-shirt is always cute.
Okay. All right. Maybe I'll do that.
Send me a picture if you want.
Deal.
Today is a little bit, I don't feel like there are no days off, but I'm taking it a little easy today because I filmed Saturday and Sunday. After this, I have therapy. And then I have to work on my own book, which is due in like 2 weeks.
Amazing.
And then I'm going to go to the gym, and then I'm going to see the new movie Friendship the new A24 movie, Friendship. So
Oh,
I'll let you know
amazing.
how that is.
Please do. Wait, okay, so you have a new book that has not been announced yet, or has been
Guys,
announced?
here,
This is so
extra hot goss here. Yes, I do have a book coming out maybe next summer. It's really fun and funny, and it's basically a pseudo self-help book about how we could all be more like children. Every chapter is a different like big topic that adults struggle with, like love and friendship, and I think there might, unless I cut it, be an environment chapter in there, Adam.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And it's
Okay.
stories from it's tidbits of interviews and stories about kids and what I think we could learn from the way that they live in the world.
Okay, this is amazing. So my book is coming out this summer, and of course, it's going to be the book of the summer.
Oh my God. Amplify, shout out.
2026 is going to be Julian's book of the summer. It's going to be amazing. So
It's a spiritual sequel to Adam's book.
and can I also just say I'm really happy that you said you have therapy, because I have therapy every week, and it is my calm place. It is necessary.
Need it. It's so good for me.
We didn't even talk really about mental health, but in a way, all we talked about was mental health.
Adam, it's such a joy to talk to you. You've become a dear friend, and I appreciated this time. This is probably the longest we've talked one-on-one. So
I know.
more of this.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Talkhouse Podcast, and thanks to Julian Shapiro-Barnum and Adam Met for chatting. If you liked what you heard, please follow Talkhouse on your favorite podcasting platform and visit talkhouse.com for lots of good stuff. This episode was produced by Myron Kaplan, and the Talkhouse theme was composed and performed by The Range. See you next time.